Did I get you? Probably not. Greetings, fellow Gravewalkers, and welcome back to another video, and a very spooky one indeed. Happy Halloween, everyone. It's not quite Halloween yet for me, or else I wouldn't have time to record this, but for you, when you're watching this, it is, and I hope it's being a very spooky day, and you've enjoyed all of Spooky Month. However, this is a very spooky video about the Undead of Middle-earth. I wanted to do this last year, didn't get around to it, but I'm doing it this year, and unlike the past few videos, it's completely unscripted, meaning you're getting loosey-goosey freeform me, which I think's more fun. So, let's jump into it and talk about the things that I'm probably the most qualified to talk about first, the Revanents and Gondorian Wights from Shadow of War. So let's jump into the Revanents, shall we? Revanents are a rarity throughout the game, being mostly summoned by Zog the Eternal in most of his missions. These guys are undead created through necromancy and black magic. Zog the Eternal, a necromancer orc, and his acolytes attempted to raise an army of Revenants so he could rebel against the Witch King of Angmar and Sauron himself. These guys are tankier than normal orcs, being that they likely don't feel pain, and unfortunately have lost their minds due to being resurrected. Which in my opinion is a rather sad thing, because imagine bringing an orc back from the dead and he's just like, "What'd you do to me? This is weird, man." I think that'd be really funny, but yeah, no, sadly, they lose their minds. But this also, again, means they don't feel pain and can pretty much continue fighting for as long as they want. You can also summon these guys after becoming a Nazgul at the end of the main story, and it becomes a main part of your gear set, and a very useful one should you want to take the necromancy route like I have. I think it's really fun being able to resurrect these guys. Now, unfortunately, like many things in the Shadow games and the Middle-earth genre in general, these guys sadly do not appear in any of Tolkien's official works, making them completely non-canon. Though I would say these are one of the few things I could actually see being in actual Tolkien canon. As it was said, Morgoth could not create, only corrupt. And I feel like Morgoth would have been the type of guy who would corrupt even the dead. Which, you know, is basically what a Revenant is. Especially corrupting the dead of his own corrupted elves. All around, I feel like Revenants could actually have a place in Middle-earth canon, and still have things be just fine. I like them. Dang it, why couldn't they be actual canon? The Gondorian Wights are met pretty late into the game in Gorgoroth, when Isildur summons them and Castamir's souls back from the dead. Upon defeating them in Castamir, you won't see Isildur for a while until the Bright Lord mission, the last main story mission. After completing it, you will get your next taste of the Gondorian Wights in what is, in my opinion, one of the best cutscenes in the entire game. And while I'm sure you've seen it, I'm going to play it again for you, because it's just that cool.
You must have rocks in your head. This is Minas Morgul, and you are one man.
I am one. But we are many.
After that cutscene and retaking Minas Morgul, the Gondorian Wights will become a permanent part of your arsenal with the ability Ringwraith. This ability completely replaces Elven Rage and will spawn 4 Gondorian Wights when activated. These guys will be completely invincible and do pretty good damage, honestly. More than I actually realized. I realized that while I was getting this footage, actually, how much damage they do. Which is pretty nice, because it basically means you have 4 permanent helpers for its duration, unlike with the resurrected orcs that can just kinda keel over. And this isn't the only way that Gondorian Wights get added to your arsenal. During the Shadow Wars, you will receive the Mask of the High King. This is the mask that Isildur wore, and it changes the behavior of Raised Dead. Raised Dead normally, obviously, raises dead orcs. However, this completely changes it, making it so it no longer raises dead orcs, and instead summons 3 Gondorian Wights. These are the same type that are summoned in Ringwraith, meaning they're completely invincible. Literally, you can just beat on them and they won't die unless you drain them, and they do pretty high damage. Now, at first, I thought this was kind of useless because, oh, well, you know, having a bunch of zombies seems more useful. But having pretty high damage in an unkillable form is kind of nice, honestly. And you can only have 3 at a time. 7 if you use Ring Wraith and then summon your, use Raised Dead to summon them. But all around, I'm actually going to use the Mask of the High King more because it's actually way better than I thought it was. And these guys, they're pretty cool. And we're not quite dead with ghostly... Wow, we're not quite dead. We're not quite done with ghostly Gondorians yet. Because our next undead are the Dead Men of Dunharrow. The Dead Men of Dunharrow, more commonly known as the Army of the Dead, were originally men from the White Mountains who swore an oath to Gondor when it was formally created. However, when the time came and Isildur called on their aid to fight against Sauron in the last alliance of men and elves, they declined. Now, the reason for this should be evident. They didn't exactly want to fight Sauron, but they did not take the fact that Isildur would be petty into account. Isildur did not react well to this, and placed a curse upon these men. And I'm gonna read exactly that curse from Isildur right now. The exact words of Isildur were, "Thou shalt be the last king, and if the West prove mightier than thy black master, this curse I lay upon thee and thy folk, to rest never until your oath is fulfilled. For this war will last through years uncounted, and you shall be summoned once again ere the end." In the most simple explanation, Isildur said nuh-uh to them dying unless they fulfilled their oath to him or his kin. And, yeah, they learned the hard way that he was not fooling around with that curse. Oh boy, they certainly regretted that. Now, for what the Army of the Dead do in the story, that depends on if we're talking about the books or the movies. In the books, they're a lot more willing to serve Aragorn, and all around they're quite different to the portrayal in the movies, including what they even do. So I don't really want to get into how they affect the story, because if I talk about the book, it's going to get really convoluted really quickly. If I talk about the movie, people that don't like the movies or wanted me to talk about the book will be mad at me. So if you want to know, go look for yourself, because I don't feel like trying to record all of this free form without a script, because that's going to be a one-way ticket to pain. Our next undead is Middle-earth's most iconic and recognizable by one singular blood-chilling sound.
That's a nice one, Sam. I think we should get off the road.
Of course, I'm talking about the Nazgul, the Ring Wraiths, the Black Riders, whatever you want to call them, and whatever name they may go by, it doesn't change what they are underneath. The servants of Sauron through and through, his most loyal, and arguably the scariest things ever made when you truly consider what they are. Of course, the Nazgul were originally mortal men, 9 of which, one of them was definitely a king, the others have some debatability depending on which source you're going on, and if you want to believe they were all kings, if some were just higher men, whatever. But the one that we all definitely know was a king is obviously the Witch King of Angmar, and the Lord of the Nazgul, who we'll get into in just a second, after we talk a little bit more about them. The most easily discussed thing about the Nazgul is easily their origins, and I know most people are going to know it, but there's going to be some that don't, so we're going to talk about their history. The Nazgul were originally 9 mortal men, some kings, some not. Sauron came to them and each gave them a ring of power, and in their greed and being stupid regular men, they just took the rings with no strings attached. You know, they thought there was nothing that was gonna happen, and boy oh boy were they sure wrong. Essentially, after taking the 9 rings of power, they would go on to live their lives until Sauron created the One Ring, in which he gained control over all of them. Of course, mortal men being the easiest to sway, unlike the elves or the dwarves. The dwarves became greedy little grubbers because of the rings, but they weren't actually under Sauron's control, and a lot of that just comes back to the origins of the dwarves, which I'm not getting into right now. And very obviously, the elves weren't really controlled because Sauron didn't really have a touch on those. So, that's how the Nazgul first became servants of Sauron, controlled by the Nine Rings of Power. After a while, they began to experience something known as the Fading. This is when their mortal bodies got so old that they eventually withered away and died, leaving the spirit to wander Arda. This is when the Nazgul truly became the Ring Wraiths, and became actual ghosts. They were invisible to the naked eye and could only be seen in the unseen world. Of course, the unseen world is its own complicated bag of worms that I don't really want to get into right now, but basically it's just the spirit world. Hence, you know, the whole unseen thing and them being ghosts. You get the idea. But they are completely invisible at this point without their armor or their cloaks or anything. They are fully just poof, Danny Phantom style, just gone, go ghost. They are not there. And that's very important for how they end up getting to the Shire, because it's very interesting. The Nazgul were already wraiths by the time of the last battle of the last alliance of men and elves, but how much they contributed and where they contributed is not fully known. All that is known is that they were present for the battle, just not to what capacity. Of course, they would then go into hiding and re-emerge in Dol Guldur in Mirkwood with the Necromancer. Of course, the Necromancer would turn out to be Sauron himself. Of course, after a good long while, the wizards would force Sauron and the Nazgul out of Dol Guldur and send them packing back to Mordor. As Sauron began rebuilding Barad-dûr in its once ashen home, the Nazgul would take up residence in Minas Morgul, the city of man that they had captured. Of course, depending on source, you have a lot of questions on how, when, what, where. All that's really known is that they captured it at some point, though there is obviously debate, and we'll talk about how Shadow of War's own lore links into it, but is still its own separate entity in a second. All that matters is the Nazgul took up home in Minas Morgul, and Sauron got back to building his fortress in Mordor. Really quick, we're going to change gears, because I think it's important to mention this for lore's sake. So, I think we're all familiar with the fact that by the time of The Lord of the Rings, there is no heir to Gondor anymore. The only heir is Aragorn, but there hasn't been a king that sat on the throne in a very long time. Of course, Isildur wasn't the last king on the throne, but he was the last really important one. Now, when we're talking about this, there's a very interesting bit of lore here, and that is that the Witch King is actually responsible for annihilating Gondor's kingship. So, to explain that a little harder, a little more in-depth, obviously the Witch King has the title, the Witch King of Angmar. Now, Angmar was a section of the map of Middle-earth over in the west. It was once a really big kingdom that then got split up by 3 sons. And then one of them got taken over by the Witch King, and he waged war on the kingdom of men and all that. It's a whole long thing, and I'm not explaining it very well. I would recommend you go watch. I think Nerd of the Rings made a whole video on that whole thing. So if you really want the full in-depth breakdown of the War of Angmar, I would definitely heavily recommend going and watching that, because he does this way more justice than I'm going to be able to do. But essentially, after that, the Witch King challenged the then Prince of Gondor to a duel. And the steward at the time was like, no dude, you don't want to go fight that guy. The Witch King will kick your ass. You're gonna lose. Don't do it, chief. Bad idea. And the prince was like, okay, cool, I'm not gonna go fight the Witch King. Eventually, when that prince became the King of Gondor, the Witch King once again extended his challenge. And this time, the King of Gondor decided to accept the Lord of the Nazgul's request, and rode off to fight him, and just never came back! Yeah, you heard that right. The King of Gondor just never came back. And assumedly, the Witch King just offed him. and ended the, reign of kingship in Gondor. Just, that's it. Just wrote off. Dude was never seen again. Literally ever. Like, no one ever found the body, no one ever saw the duel, nothing. So, assumedly, the Witch King won that fight pretty easily. But I think that's quite interesting to put into perspective that the Witch King is the reason Gondor doesn't have a king. And it's something that the movies, and I don't think even the books really bring up. I don't know on the books part, but yeah, no. It's never really brought up that the Witch King is the reason there is no king in Gondor. Of course, Angmar would later fall apart, and the Witch King would flee back to the east toward Mordor and all that. Yada, 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 whole bibbidi-bobbidi, this, that, the other. I think we all know that song and dance, but there you go. Later, Gollum would be captured by Mordor and brought back to the newly constructed Barad-dûr, where he would be tortured for actual years, mind you, which is not very pleasant to think about. And he would end up telling them just a few things. The terms, of course, my precious, along with Shire and Baggins. That's not much to go on, but they kind of put two and two together and realized, oh, okay, maybe the One Ring is still intact, and it's owned by a Baggins in a place called the Shire. Now, notably, the denizens of Mordor had no idea that the Shire even existed, mind you. They were like, what is this Shire thing? And eventually Sauron was just like, the One Ring, go get it! And sent the Nazgul out to go find it. And that turned into a whole thing where basically they ditched all of their crap and went across the River Isen, completely invisible, so no one would see them coming. And on the other side, the spies of Sauron would give them the gear that you later see them use at Weathertop and along the road and all that. So that's how they actually got into the west, is they went across the river with nothing on. They were practically invisible. Now, in this time, Gandalf's gone to Minas Tirith, he's gone to see Aragorn, they've captured Gollum themselves, they've learned that, yes, that is the One Ring and that Mordor is coming for the Shire. Now, funnily enough here, the Nazgul just couldn't find the Shire. Like, straight up, they were just like, where is this place, man? We've been looking for forever. And eventually they decide, okay, we're gonna go talk to Saruman, basically, right? We're gonna go see Saruman. And Saruman kind of pointed them in the right direction, but wouldn't reveal much to them. So they were like, okay, we know it's to the west somewhere, so we're just gonna head west and go have a look. We'll hit up other towns, we'll interrogate, use the fear of the Dark Lord as our, weapon, and try to find it. So eventually, they get enough info to actually learn, okay, this is where the Shire is. Let's get going. So they get there, and obviously they are just a little too late to catch the hobbits, as the hobbits managed to catch a ferry, and that's just about where their chase ended for there until they got to Bree. Which, I just find it so funny that the most elite followers of Sauron couldn't find the dang short people place. Just like looking for the Shire for forever. And even Saruman was trolling them at this point. It's just kind of funny to me how inept the Nazgul seem in that scenario. Eventually the Nazgul would pick up two trails. The first being Gandalf's, heading away from Weathertop toward Rivendell, of which 4 Nazgul would chase after him. The other 5, led by the Witch King, would follow the trail of the hobbits and their new companion Aragorn towards Weathertop. While Aragorn was out doing stuff, the hobbits would then get cornered by the 5 Nazgul, and Frodo would be stabbed by the Witch King with the Morgul blade, before Aragorn would appear, fight them off, and then the Witch King would cop a torch to the face, get lit on fire, and they would just back off and regroup. The 4 following Gandalf would then regroup with the other 5 and chase, in the movies, Arwen toward Rivendell, and in the books, it's Glorfindel instead. Either way, the 5 Nazgul and the 4 Nazgul groups rejoin into the full 9 to chase someone towards Rivendell. After this, the Nazgul are swept away in the river and decide, you know what, we're gonna sit back for a second and just regroup. We'll deal with them but we have some other things to deal with first. An interesting thing to note about Weathertop is that it was actually once the home of a Palantir, and was actually located in one of the kingdoms that Angmar began a war on during the War of Angmar. So the Witch King is kind of revisiting some of his history, as he was personally responsible for the destruction of what Weathertop once was, and was the one to retrieve the Palantir from there. So I think that's rather neat, that this is kind of a walk down memory lane for the Witch King. Also kind of funny that this is the scene of one of his bigger accomplishments, you know, striking Frodo with the Morgul blade and, you know, causing him to suffer for literally ever until he goes to the Undying Lands. But, you know, just a fun little fact there, that Weathertop was in fact located in one of the kingdoms during the War of Angmar. Now, unfortunately, the Nazgul don't really do much after this point. They mostly are there to spread fear and terror among the world of men, and don't really participate in many of the battles, as that's the Uruk-hai and the Orcs' jobs. Of course, they do appear at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and are there at the last stand at the Black Gate, and go towards Mount Doom as the ring is about to be destroyed. And of course, as the ring is destroyed, the Nazgul all fade out of existence, and the Witch King is already destroyed at this point. So that's about the end for the Nazgul. The last undead of this video is likely the least well known, and the one with the least amount of information, those being the Barrow Wights. The Barrow Wights were encountered by the hobbits when they entered a place known as the Barrow Downs when leaving the Shire. Within the Barrow Downs, the Barrow Wights attacked them, and the hobbits would have died if it weren't for Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil saved them, and then each gave them a knife. These were known as the Barrow Blades. Of course, in the movies, it's Aragorn who gives them these knives, and the Barrow Wights and the Barrow Downs are just never mentioned at all. But in the books, it is, in fact, Tom Bombadil. Now, with the blades in hand, they can fight back against the Barrow Wights and escape. Now, there's a lot of questions on what the Barrow Wights and the Barrow Downs even are. And the most widely agreed upon seems to be that the Barrow Downs was a gravesite for men in the First Age, and their souls have become the Barrow Wights, who desperately seek to protect their resting ground, kind of similar to the dead men of Dunharrow in a way. This does seem to make the most sense, as it's in the western part of Middle-earth, which is where men would reside, theoretically. You know, it's known more so as the land of men than anything else. So, I kinda like that idea. But that's the Barrow Wights. Beyond that, during my Let's Play of LEGO Lord of the Rings, which will continue at some point, hopefully next year maybe, if I can get a PC by then, basically, I realized on the third episode that the Hobbits' swords are actually called the Barrow Blades, which I thought was really neat, because considering it's a LEGO version of the movies, I didn't think they would actually have a callback to the books there, but they do, which that was really cool in my opinion. Just wanted to throw this in here, because I thought it was neat. And just for the sake of covering absolutely every base, I am going to bring up the fact that the Barrow Wights were recently seen in Rings of Power Season 2 on Amazon. I know that's not a super popular thing with everyone, but it does have, you know, its fans. I'm not going to get into my opinions on it, because just make your own. Mine don't really matter at all. But they were featured. All they really did was slow down Elrond's group of elves while they were traveling to Eregion, but it was a cool cameo, and neat to see what a semi-official interpretation of the Barrow Wights would actually look like. Of course, they're slightly more skeletal and less, you know, freaky looking than that first artwork I showed, but I still think they actually are pretty neat looking. It's kind of cool. I like the whole tattered red look. It is certainly unique, to say the very least. But that just about ends it for the Barrow Wights as a whole, and brings this video to my outro. With that, we've come to the end of this extra spooky Halloween special on the Undead of Middle-earth. If you did enjoy this video, consider hitting the like button down below, as it tells me you like the video. And if you like what I do, consider subscribing for more. With that, I will see you all next time.